of speech. But first, folks, we're going to get straight to the news and find out what the latest bulletins are with Tatiana.
The author Sir Salman Rushdie is on a ventilator and may lose an eye after he was attacked on stage during an event in New York yesterday. The 75-year-old was appearing at a literary festival when he was repeatedly stabbed in the neck and abdomen. He's faced several death threats from Islamists since the 1989 publication of his book, The Satanic Verses. New York State Police have named the suspect as 24-year-old Hadi Matar. He remains in custody. Chief Executive of Humanists UK, Andrew Copson, said that Rushdie was a champion for freedom of expression.
He and his books have become iconic in that cause. And so to see him struck down by violence, not by someone who had an answer to his points, but by someone who senselessly, violently wanted to silence his voice, really just illustrates one of the great dividing lines in our world today.
While speaking to GB News, the head of counter-terrorism at the MOD, Chip Chapman, claimed there were security failings.
In America, there are 18,000 different jurisdictions of law and order. So somewhere someone let their guard down on this. But more interestingly, in a way, is this chap, Hadi Matar, was 24. Most 24-year-olds would never heard of Salman Rushdie and would never heard of the Satanic Verses. So really the process of what got him to a position where he could wander into this event, a ticketed event where he had a ticket, how did that process occur?
Rail passengers face further disruption as drivers at 9 train companies walk out over pay and conditions. Train drivers have gathered in North West London this morning as members of ASLEF walk out over jobs, pay and conditions. While West Coast Services, LNER, London Overground and South Eastern are all affected. Some parts of the country will have no services running at all. The Independent's travel editor Simon Calder argues that unions are striking now to cause maximum disruption.
Of course, what ASLEF, the Train Drivers Union, wants to do is cause absolute peak damage to travel plans. And that's why they've chosen a Saturday in the middle of August, because they know it's really going to hit families hard. It's going to hit those travellers who absolutely depend on rail to get to and from their holidays, to go on day trips. They're just doing all they can to cause as much harm as they can.
One person has died and dozens have been injured after a stage collapsed at a music festival near the Spanish city of Valencia. Strong winds caused a section of the main stage at the dance festival to collapse. 3 people were seriously injured, with 14 suffering minor wounds and 40 being treated in total. New court documents show the FBI has seized several top-secret files during a search at Donald Trump's estate in Florida. A federal judge approved a warrant to carry out a search at the former president's Mar-a-Lago property. It's after the US government said it's possible he'd violated the Espionage Act, a law that prohibits passing on or keeping national defence information. Mr. Trump has denied any wrongdoing and said the items were declassified. The Welsh secretary has become the first cabinet minister to publicly switch sides in the Tory leadership race, putting his support behind Liz Truss. Writing in the Daily Telegraph, Sir Robert Buckland said he believed the Foreign Secretary's economic policy would help the country through the current cost of living crisis. While speaking to Esther and Philip, Brexit Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg also said he's supporting Truss.
I think having somebody who understands that what they thought earlier in life isn't right, and particularly with the referendum, accepts enthusiastically what the British people gave her to deal with. And she's not alone in that. I've always thought the most impressive Remainers are the ones who, once the result came in, said, OK, that's it, I'm accepting it, and I want now to do it properly. And there are a number of those. There are quite a lot who say that and don't really mean it. But I found in government that Liz, other than the Prime Minister himself, was my greatest supporter for getting Brexit opportunities.
The Environment Agency says drought conditions could last until next year. It's after more extreme heat is expected in the south of England this weekend, while the north is set to be struck by thunderstorms and floods. Amber weather warnings have been issued. Further water companies could also enforce stricter measures to conserve supplies, with Yorkshire Water being the latest to introduce a hosepipe ban. Dr. Simon Boxall is a senior lecturer of oceanography, and he told GB News there could be more droughts in the future.
Compare us now to 1976, when we had the last big drought. We are much better prepared than we used to be. But you have got what is tragically a sort of a series of events which has brought this very, very dry weather. And I think we do need to think about this in the future, because we are going to see more of these droughts.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now back to Real Britain with Darren Grimes.
Welcome to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Here's what's coming up on the show today. We're all feeling the effects of the cost of living crisis, but with the added threat of drought, which is set to worsen the cost of food, I'm asking whether or not it's time for people to look at alternative meats like pigeons and rabbits. Former aides to Donald Trump have decided to launch a new dating app called The Right Stuff, which is set to bring like-minded conservatives together. I'll be speaking to a behaviour and etiquette expert to find out why it's necessary. Now, the latest figures show that parents are increasingly turning to private health services for support for their children's mental health problems. Why is that? I'll be speaking to a GP to see why there's so much demand for mental health provisions in this country. And that's what we're talking about for the next hour. As ever, your thoughts are much more important than mine. What do you reckon of eating things like pigeon and rabbits? Would you be up for it if it saved you a few quid? Tweet me at GB News or email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. Watch us online on YouTube, and don't forget Facebook. Loads of cracking content on our page. Cheers very much. Before all that, I want to talk to you about law and order. You see, we British like to consider ourselves a country with values that are worth defending and extolling to the world. One of the most precious values is law and order. A nation without property rights, you see, and robust protection by the enforcers of the rule of law can never be a free nation. You cannot reasonably assume that what is yours will remain yours if the guardians of your right to own property don't show up to defend what's yours when you need them. But that's what's taking place today in lawless Britain. This week, I had a friend of mine, he had his bag nicked in London, and he told me that he knew exactly where this bag was. You see, modern technology, it's a wonder. He had tracking data from his laptop. So this bag containing his passport and other personal effects was quickly written off by the cops as irretrievable, despite the fact he could tell them exactly where this bag was. And the police say there's naught they can do. Move on, now to see here, folks. And this isn't, I'm afraid, an isolated one-off case. There are many of you out there that have gotten in touch with me with your concerns around this. And a significant report by Andy Cook, Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Constabulary, has documented deep defects in police forces' handling of crimes like theft, robbery and burglary. Fewer than 1 in 20 thefts, that's 1 in 20, and 1 in 15 burglaries result in a criminal being caught and charged. That is a pathetic number, if you ask me. And as you might be aware, the Conservatives pledged 20,000 cops in their 2019 election-winning manifesto to replace those that were cut. And both Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak have committed to meeting that target. But I ask you, what use is such a target? We could have an extra 100,000 coppers, and unless their priorities actually align with our own, what's the point in them? It seems that the police are policing political correctness more and more, but not, seemingly, law and order. We want real crimes investigated, not non-crime hate incidents being recorded, Orwellian as they are. And while I'm at it, for posing for pictures at pride festivals in activist charity Stonewall emblazoned pride cars that look better suited to Coco the Clown and not Colin the Copper, it's not a great look. I mean, ask yourself this. What most do you want the cops to actually investigate? It would be a burglary and a theft over a few tweets online in this day and age. Do we actually tell them that you want a hate crime to be investigated, that you want a burglar potentially that misgendered you, or you could say that he used your hose pipe and actually get the police to investigate that, that the burglar wolf whistled at you, maybe that would get the police to take action, or maybe he sent you an offensive tweet or made a non-PC joke on Facebook, maybe that would get the cops to act. The things that the police will and won't investigate are quickly becoming a woke joke. And senior coppers blame cuts. But I ask you, what criteria must now be hit to actually allow the plod to take things seriously? Most want to get policing off of our tweets and onto our streets. And it shouldn't be the role of the police to soothe the petulance of the permanently offended. It should absolutely be the role of the police to investigate and charge those that have stolen something that you've worked damn hard for, thank you very much. Some brave lads and lasses gallantly work in the force each day to keep us all safe. And we'll be doing them a massive favour if we actually remind the upper echelons of the force of their day job. Because after all, right, they're Britain's police force. They're not Twitter's police force. Next up, we're all seeing the cost of living increase, no more so than those of us who are buying meat like beef and pork. Prices are going way up in the shops. And it's time, maybe, to consider different forms of meat to actually get your protein fix. We used to eat animals like deer, rabbits and pigeons, but they've fallen out of favour in recent decades. So rather than simply culling them, is it time for Britain to consider eating other alternatives instead? Well, joining me now, I'm delighted to say, to debate the meaty topic is farmer Gareth Wynne-Jones and Robert Gordon, a spokesperson for Animal Rebellion. Gareth, I'll come to you first, if you don't mind. The prices of meats and beef and pork, they're all going up in the shops. Do you think it is time to start talking about alternatives?
Well, I haven't stopped eating alternatives. I do a lot of shooting, so pigeons, squirrels, rabbit, hares, everything, deer, everything's on my menu. And it's fantastic food, you know. It's food that protects the food that we're growing and it feeds us as well. And that's really important. Not wasting these animals, but eating them at every chance we get. And there's lots of fantastic recipes. And it will take the pressure off the older cows as well.
For my radio listeners, Gareth has got a fantastic image of a cow there, one of his cows. But Gareth, would you actually welcome the return of deer, rabbits and pigeon to our dinner tables? Because some people might say, oh, you know, poor Bambi.
No, listen, it's fantastic food. And, you know, when we're growing crops, to protect them crops, we need to shoot pigeons, you know, we need to keep the deer numbers down to protect tree growth. Yeah. Everything has a balance. So when we take these out of the equation, they're fantastic to eat then. You know, we should be utilising it. We should be promoting it as healthy, nutritious food. And there's so many great recipes. I was brought up on rabbit and hare and pigeon. And, you know, I still go shooting pheasants, a big part of what I eat as well. Duck, because, you know, wild duck. It's all fantastic. Really, really need to be pushing it. And it's nutritional value as well, you know, because it's outside, it's eating all the healthy stuff, and that'll come through in the meat.
Yeah, and Gareth, what do you think about those like the likes of Animal Rebellion and other outfits that might well say, well, look, we should look to alternatives, maybe like insects, Gareth?
Yeah, listen, if they want to eat bugs, yeah, carry on. You know, it's not a problem with me. That's their decision. But they will be killing as many animals as me, because the food that's grown, you know, to produce corn, you know, to put into a lot of the foods they're eating, will be shooting pigeons, keeping the number of deer down, you know, keeping crows off. shooting rats as well. You know, all these things are part of the food system. So no food we're putting on our plate will not have a death toll. So we just got to utilise it and, you know, enjoy everything about what we're doing and not waste it. Celebrate, you know, the animals that we've taken their lives by eating them.
Because Gareth, the point that you raised there is a really important one, and I think only someone in your profession would actually understand that and be able to tell us that, unlike the activist classes who are telling us we need to consume less meat and actually to farm less as well. They would curtail your industry. I'm wondering, the biodiversity, we don't actually speak about the knock-on effects. You've just mentioned there, more deer can actually act as a deterrent on trees and things like that. That's exactly what the likes of the eco-extremists actually purport to want to see, isn't it?
Yeah, and you know, we have to have a balance. We can't have overpopulations of deer. If you do, you're not going to get any tree growth. You know, we can't have overpopulation of pigeons as well, especially wood pigeons, you know, and a couple of fried wood pigeon breasts are absolutely fantastic with a bit of bacon. So, you know, we have to address that balance to grow our food. So by addressing that and eating the animals that, you know, we're taking out to protect the other foods, it's a win-win situation. So it doesn't matter if you're vegan, vegetarian, or you're a meat eater, you know, you should be promoting the eating of these animals instead of throwing them away. And it's cheap, nutritious, healthy meat.
And Gareth, then, what do you make of those in the groups like Animal Rebellion that are attacking, it's not just the meat industry, but they're also attacking the dairy industry? And we've seen scenes of people pouring milk all over Harrods and places like that, middle-class activists pouring away dairy produce. What do you make of those sort of moves and activism?
Well, to be honest with you, you know, they've got no idea of what's happening in the real world. You know, they've never been hungry, they've never struggled. They're in there just to show themselves as climate activists, which will have no idea of the importance of milk in our everyday diet. You know, milk is a whole food. We get yogurt from it, we get cheese from it, we get butter from it, we get cream from it. You know, dairy cows are a big part of what we are as people. I've had an ice cream here today, I've had a milkshake, you know, all these things are dairy orientated. So yeah, let's get behind it, but we've got to stop these people, you know, the way that they were throwing that milk in Harrods. They need to be prosecuted, they need to be dealt with. They cannot take away other people's choices. If they don't want to drink dairy, if they don't want to drink and eat, you know, meat, that's their decision. Carry on, that's not a problem. They're about 2 or 3% of the population, and to be honest with you, they're not to be worried about. The majority of people understand the importance of milk and meat in their daily diet.
Yeah, before we go to Robert, I just want to play this clip so my viewers get a sense of the kind of activism that's actually taken place today. So, Gareth, looking at those scenes, is this actually an effective way? Because I just ask, you're actually burdening the cleaners, right? You're burdening, it's the least well off that you're putting this burden on with your activism. It's not actually the upper echelons of the dairy industry or even of Harrods that you're ruining the day of.
Sorry, you broke up there for a minute.
Oh. Well, Gareth, I'm just saying it's actually not the upper echelons of Harrods or the dairy industry that are affected by this, is it? It's the poor cleaners at the end of the day that have got to clean up this mess left by these pig-ignorant activists.
Well, I think it's a childish act, you know. They're just trying to show off, and you've seen them in their expensive pumps and they're, you know, I hate to say the word woke, but we get into trouble for saying it. But, you know, they're just a middle-class city slickers. They've got no real idea what food production. If they want to go vegan to thinking that they're saving the planet, good for them, carry on. But don't take away that choices. And again, you're dead right. The cleaners there will be on minimum wage, cleaning up their mess. Do they care? No. It was just a childish act of protest, which I think was absolutely pathetic, wasting top quality food, milk on the floor like that. It shouldn't be happening. And if they come after farmers and try to stop the dairy industry this September, there will be a fight back. The farmers are ready, willing, and the processors are. They need to start to understand it's a freedom of choice and they shouldn't be doing it.
So, Robert, what do you say to that charge that you just don't care, that you're city slickers that don't care about the cost of living crisis, generation defining even as it is, that actually you people don't care about real people out there?
Well, I'd say, first of all, that I grew up in rural Norfolk, so it's patently false. But when we're talking about a cost of living crisis, we have to remember that farmers have been in a cost of living crisis for years now. So when we go and we do these protests, which, by the way, were inspired by farmers who in 2015 across Europe used the exact same tactics. When we do this, we're calling on the government to support farmers in a just transition to a plant-based food system. Because we were talking about win-wins before, and our demand is a very clear win-win. When we transition to a plant-based future, we free up a significant amount of land, and that land can be rewilded, draw down carbon from the atmosphere, alleviate our climate crisis, and return nature and vital habitats to the species that need it most, that are currently at threat of extinction.
But Robert, or rather, what do you say to people like Gareth who say, well, actually, you would be saying to the biodiversity of my farm, deers act as a pest if there are too many of them as far as trees are concerned. Actually, you would end up, it would be counterproductive to advocate that we just stop farming animals, essentially.
There's a lot of science-backed studies that show that this transition is possible, and not only that it is possible, but that it is a key solution to our climate and biodiversity crises.
So, Robert, what's your response then to people like Gareth? Are you just saying to him, well, suck it up, buttercup, we're going to come for your farm, we want your farm to end, your livelihood to be gone?
Not at all. We're making it very clear that we are on the side of farmers here. Obviously, there are going to be some who disagree with us and resist our calls to the government to support farmers in this sustainable transition to a plant-based future. But there are many more on our side. We're in conversation with farmers about this. We'll be on the ground with farmers in September when we take action to stop the supply of dairy. And previously, we've stood alongside farmers in protests, for example, outside Parliament in 2020, when we supported the Save British Farming group, who were protesting the US and Australian trade deals that will see the UK market flooded with low-cost, cheap, low-welfare, terribly devastating imports that could bankrupt 70% of farmers. So we're on their side. We just want the government, who are currently starving farmers, who have put them in this cost of living crisis, supermarkets who are reducing farmers' profits and taking money away from them. And we're calling on them to support farmers in a just transition to a plant-based future.
Yeah, so you're not really supporting them because you're actually trying to destroy their industries. But anyway, guys, we're going to have to leave it there and agree to disagree. That was the farmer Gareth Wynne-Jones and Robert Gordon, a spokesperson for Animal Rebellion. Now, there's plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain. Next, we're going to be delving into the world of online dating. A Tory looking for love can now have some help with an app called The Right Stuff, which is aimed at helping a true blue find some red-hot romance. More on that in a minute, but first, here's the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking warm for many as temperatures only slowly fall away across the country. Let's take a look at the details. There will be plenty of late evening sunshine across the southwest of England with only light breezes. It will be feeling warm with temperatures still in the mid to high 20s. The temperatures across the southeast of England may be even warmer and still be in the low 30s this evening. Some high cloud may make the sunshine a little hazy though before sunset. High cloud may also be across the skies in Wales, possibly giving a vivid sunset this evening. It will be feeling warm with temperatures still in the mid to high 20s. Cloud could also be bubbling up this evening across the Midlands, but it will remain dry. though with light and variable winds as well. Temperatures this evening likely to remain in the low 30s. Northeast coast of England may have a rather gloomy evening as some sea fog moves in, but for many the day will end on a very warm and sunny note. The low cloud and fog will also affect the north and east coast of Scotland. The high ground may also see a shower develop, but for most it will be dry and warm. It's a similar story in Northern Ireland as we end the day, with perhaps some cloud near the coast, but for most it will be sunny and feeling warm. Overnight, we may see some showers develop in the northwest, but for most it will be dry and remaining warm. And that is how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Darren Grimes. Now, folks, I want to ask you, if you find yourself on the right of British politics and you're looking for love, maybe I've got the story just for you. A new dating app is launching called The Right Stuff, and it's coming next month to bring conservatives and like-minded people together. They argue that there's a left liberal bias amongst the current platforms. The invite-only app has been created by former aides to Donald Trump. Here's a quick sample of their launch video.
Hey guys, I'm Ryan. I've got to tell you about something I am so excited to announce. A dating app for all of us conservatives. It's called The Right Stuff, and it's launching this September.
Well, does it have the right stuff? What are the chances of success in this latest dating app venture? Well, joining me to discuss this is the behaviour expert Liz Brewer, I'm delighted to say. Liz, thank you for your company. The creation of this app, and they're saying the USP of it is that it won't be biased towards the liberal left like other apps. What do you think explains this fear of those on the right of British politics? Because let's not forget, 14 million people voted Conservative in 2019. That's quite a lot of people who may well be looking for love, Liz.
May well be, yes. Bearing in mind, this has been launched, the young, very charming girl whose sister, I note, is the press secretary at the White House, or was, and therefore, yes, a friend of Trump's. First of all, I thought this, if it was April, I'd think it was an April Fool. However, giving it some thought, during the pandemic, it was very difficult for young people, and this is apparently a young app, it was very difficult for young people to make connections, and therefore these dating apps came into their own. However, I don't know how well they did. All I know is I have an awful lot of young friends, especially young girls, who had traumatic experiences and really didn't think it worked, and had, in the end, it actually did a lot of damage. You know, the whole idea of an app, a dating app, is to find somebody that you can have a conversation with, perhaps a relationship with, but perhaps become a long-term friend. You go back to the days before we had apps, before we had all this technology, and believe it or not, the whole meeting and dating game was a little bit like some cultures today, when it was organised by the family, by good friends. You know, take Indian families, for example, when arranged marriages. Not so much nowadays, but it still happens.
So, Liz, do you think is there a phenomenon of people just becoming a lot more tribal, and you're basically, if you're on the right, you're in that group, and no one from the left could possibly countenance dating you? Are we actually becoming more divided as a society, and is that seeping through into the world of dating?
It is becoming traumatic, because if I believe in something and you don't, it may well be that we won't be friends. Now, at one time, you could have an argument. You could give your point of view, and you would consider my point of view, and you'd either accept it or reject it. But you didn't want to break up a friendship. Nowadays, it's all or nothing. And with dating, I think with dating, it's something that is obviously now evolving. It may well be, at the moment, this is for apparently young conservative-minded people. I can't see why anybody couldn't go on it, as long as their intentions were correct and honourable. And I can see no reason why there shouldn't be other apps, you know, appealing to perhaps people on the other side, or maybe they'll all get together. You know, it's one of those things, who knows?
Yeah, well, I wonder how many of my viewers will be joining this app, Liz, but I thank you very much for your time and your contribution there. That's Liz Brewer, the etiquette and behaviour expert. Now, I want to talk to my in-studio guest, who I'm delighted to say is Calvin Robinson, Father Calvin Robinson, I should say. Calvin, what do you make of this sort of app? Do you find it quite sad that such an app is deemed necessary?
I think dating apps are problematic because people are more lost, more lonely and more isolated than ever, and looking to make relationships, looking to make connections, but don't necessarily know how to anymore. You know, my grandparents were married, over 50 years. They met in the dance hall, which was very formal, you know, to go over to someone and ask them to dance. And even all that side of the culture is gone now. We live in a hookup culture where everything's temporary and everything's about pleasure, immediate pleasure, and nothing is long-term or commitment. That's a great shame, because I genuinely think people have this void in them now because they're looking for something stronger, but they don't know how to get it.
And I wonder, how much do you think that influences the rise of the movements of Extinction Rebellion, of Black Lives Matter, these political movements where people are searching perhaps for something bigger than themselves, a hole that used to be filled, dare I say, by Christianity?
Indeed.
Is that what this is all about, Calvin?
Yeah, that's part of it. So, you know, we used to make connections through our parents. We used to be introduced to people from different families because our parents know us sometimes better than we know ourselves. So that would work a lot better than, I think, an app. But then we'd also make connections through the church, which was the true home of diversity. People of different ages, different genders, whatever, people from your local area that might not necessarily be like you. But now we go online and we live in our echo chambers and we're not used to seeing people with different thoughts and opinions to ourselves.
So, Calvin, can my viewers expect to see you on this app?
They can't. I don't use dating apps, but I wish them well.
All right, we'll come back to Calvin Robinson throughout the show. Now, folks, you're with GB News on telly and radio. I thank you for doing so. Next, I'm delighted to say I'm going to be talking about the success of Brexit Britain. Unlike the BBC, it seems like for America, the UK is becoming a prime location for some of their biggest businesses, not least because of the tax incentives. Now, though, it's time for a check on the news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
2:34. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The author Sir Salman Rushdie is on a ventilator and may lose an eye after he was attacked on stage during an event in New York yesterday. The 75-year-old was appearing at a literary festival when he was repeatedly stabbed in the neck and abdomen. He's faced several death threats from Islamists since the 1989 publication of his book, The Satanic Verses. New York State Police have named the suspect as 24-year-old Hadi Mattar. He remains in custody. Train drivers have gathered in northwest London as members of ASLEF walk out over jobs, pays and condition. Rail passengers face further disruption as drivers at 9 train companies walk out over the pay and conditions, while West Coast services LNER, London Overground and South Eastern are all affected. Some parts of the country will have no services running at all. The Environment Agency says drought conditions could last until next year. It's after more extreme heat is expected in the south of England this weekend, while the north is set to be struck by thunderstorms and floods. Amber weather warnings have been issued. Further water companies could also enforce stricter measures to conserve supplies, with Yorkshire Water being the latest to introduce a hosepipe ban. The FBI say they have seized several top-secret files during a search at Donald Trump's estate in Florida. Court documents show a federal judge approved a warrant to carry out a search at the former president's Mar-a-Lago property. It's after the US government said it's possible he'd violated the Espionage Act, a law that prohibits passing on or keeping national defense information. Mr. Trump has denied any wrongdoing and said the items were declassified. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere, Darren's back in a moment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Now, I don't know about you, but I've been sick to me back teeth of the Brexit bashing to Britain bash. For years, we've been told that leaving the EU would cause a mass exodus of business and investment from our shores. They'd be scrambling for the lifeboats to get over to the other side of the channel. Now, though, prime location of big business is increasingly, guess where? Brexit Britain. Even Meta, which is the tech giant that owns Facebook, has traded sunny Liberal California for some swanky new offices in central London. Now, all of that sounds like a far cry from what the fear-mongering Remainers told us that we'd be welcome to in apocalyptic scenarios of Brexit Britain in 2016. Well, I'm delighted to say that Niall Gardner, foreign policy analyst, joins me in the studio to give us the lowdown. Niall Gardner, why do you think so many... You've got Nick Clegg, former Deputy Prime Minister, infamously anti-Brexit. He was very much opposed to Brexit. Now, he's scrambling to get here to enjoy a cushy tax regime.
Well, Darren, it's great to be here on the show, and it is remarkable how these anti-Brexit Remainers, many of them in the United States, are now deciding to move to Brexit Britain. So Nick Clegg, former Deputy Prime Minister, is a perfect example of that, actually. Someone who absolutely hates Brexit, but now is eating humble pie, moving back to London. And you've got a whole series of Silicon Valley executives who are fleeing socialist California for Britain. And this says a lot, I think, about the hope and vision that Brexit Britain has on the world stage. And you are seeing leading US entrepreneurs, including actually the head of Instagram, I believe, moving to London.
Yeah.
And they are fleeing basically a California that is sinking under the heavy weight of excessive taxation, over-regulation, huge big government, oppression basically in California, and soaring crime rates as well. I mean, California is in a serious state of disarray with rising crime, especially Los Angeles and San Francisco, widespread looting of stores, for example. And this is what happens when the far left runs, a state of nearly 40 million people, America's most populous state. But, in the last year alone, 275,000 people fled California. Many are moving to low-tax Republican states like Texas, for example. Elon Musk relocated his Tesla headquarters from California to Texas.
But someone like Gavin Newsom, you couldn't really call him far left, could you?
Well, I suppose you could, actually, yes. I mean, I do think that, California's an absolute disaster.
Would you call Joe Biden far left?
I think it's the most far-left presidency in US history. I mean, this is a big spending, socialist-style presidency, actually. It's very, very extreme. And, the House of Representatives, of course, dominated by the Democrats at the moment. That will change in November. But they just voted, along with the Senate, to approve a, $400 billion plus spending and tax package. Ironically named the Inflation Reduction Act. It does exactly the opposite, in fact. Yeah. So we are dealing with a very left-wing administration that is, quite socialist in outlook, against the fundamentals of the free market. And US Conservatives certainly are planning a big fight.
Speaking of that, UK Conservatives are feeling like maybe it's they're like the cat that got the cream at the prospect of Liz Truss coming in and massively slashing taxes and things like that. Do you think that is mainly why people like Nick Clegg are saying, oh, well, hang on a minute, this, I'll go back home, sounds pretty cushy now?
Yeah, I think, if you have a Conservative, government that actually fully implements Conservative policies and is driven by a low-tax, limited government agenda, which Liz Truss is promising...
You're firmly on the Truss train.
Well, I think Liz Truss would be actually an excellent Prime Minister, and she does have strong Thatcherite instincts, and she is pledging to implement a Thatcherite agenda. If she goes forward with that, that will be tremendous for Britain in the Brexit era. It can outcompete the United States. It can outcompete, definitely, of course, the European Union, which is a complete basket case, frankly. And I do think there is a positive future for the United Kingdom, provided it rolls back, the huge oppressive role of sort of big government, regulation and controls. Now that we're outside of the European Union, I think there's so much that Great Britain can do as a free, sovereign nation. And even Silicon Valley executives who sneered at Brexit recognise that fact, and they see the opportunity in a lower tax Brexit Britain.
Why do you think, though, that so many in the media, in the press, like to actually seek to find avenues of which they can beat Britain with? Right? Large sticks on things like when they told us that hundreds of thousands even of jobs would be lost. we've seen that as far as financial services is concerned, that hasn't been the case. It absolutely hasn't. On no measure can you make that argument. Why do you think they were so desperate to paint a vision of Britain that is one of this unique backwater, racist, swivel-eyed and all the rest of it? I mean, you even had Joe Biden coming out and saying, you know, because of his Catholic background, his Irish ancestry, that he viewed Britain as a unique, almost, he implied, you know, that we had done so wrong, essentially, throughout the whole Brexit process, and Northern Ireland being locked, of course, within the EU single market, within the EU's regulatory restraints. And actually, I wanted to say, sling your hook, basically.
Yeah, you know, it's time for, you know, Joe Biden to back off, basically.
Yeah.
You know, Joe Biden hates Brexit. He's surrounded by advisors in the White House who intensely dislike Brexit, who sneer at it. And, you know, you do have this striking, I think, correlation between the left-wing liberal elites in the United States and the left-wing liberal elites in the European Union. They have the same mindset, actually. And they see Brexit, a hugely popular democratic move forward by Great Britain, as a threat, actually, to their worldview, to their left-wing ideology. And Brexit is all about, basically, sovereignty, self-determination, taking back control. And, you know, Joe Biden, actually, you know, sees this as a threat to his sort of supranationalist, worldview. And Joe Biden has been absolutely awful in terms of the treatment of Great Britain. It's been condescending, it's been arrogant. Liz Truss, if she becomes the Prime Minister, and highly likely to be the next Prime Minister, she needs to stand up to Joe Biden. She needs to defend British interests, and she needs to tell Joe Biden to mind his own business, frankly.
So now what would you say to those that say, well, hang on a minute, we're all getting excited about this, but actually the reality is that workers likes of Facebook are saying, yeah, we'll go there, because actually they can pay cheaper wages here?
Yeah, I think that's really what's driving it here. I mean, I think that, you know, with big US tech companies moving to the UK, Google's another example of you know, a great deal of investment in Britain. They're moving to the UK because of lower tax rates than there are in parts of the United States, but also they see the opportunity with, you know, Great Britain as a sovereign nation on the world stage, actually.
So this isn't a race to the bottom. This isn't Britain on a race to the bottom.
Quite the opposite, actually. And they understand, actually, that the UK can thrive and prosper outside of the European Union. As much as they have attacked Brexit, they recognise that the UK, with lower tax rates, with more of a free market economy, and with the tremendous position of the City of London for centuries, you know, a beacon, basically, of economic freedom, they recognise a business opportunity. It's good for them. It's good for the United Kingdom. It's going to create jobs in Great Britain. It's a win-win situation, actually. And they are fleeing, you know, the perils of socialism sweeping across, you know, big parts of the United States under the Biden presidency.
Well,
if I may, Darren.
Yes, absolutely, Calvin.
It's part of the problem, not the mainstream media, the metropolitan liberal elites, because the one thing I can see that's worse than the inflation in the US is the US press trying to explain that inflation is now a good thing because it comes under Biden's regime.
Well,
exactly. Excellent point, Calvin.
It is. And it's actually a distortion of truth and fact. But hey-ho, we live in absolutely mad times, but we will have to leave it there. Niall Gardner, I thank you very much for coming into the studio. Now, next up, Salman Rushdie's agent has said the news is not good after the author was stabbed at an event in New York. He's now on a ventilator and he's unable to speak. The suspect has been identified by state police as 24-year-old Hadi Matter from New Jersey, and preliminary review of his social media actually shows that he had sympathies for Shia extremism and Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Mr. Rushdie has suffered years of Islamist death threats after writing the Satanic Verses, which was a book published in 1988. So does this show more than ever, folks, that freedom of speech is in peril in this country? Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me now down the line is Brendan O'Neill to elaborate on his case that actually we are in peril as far as speech is concerned in this country. Brendan, could you just set out why there is controversy, quote unquote, behind the novelist, and why actually one of the most successful British authors, you know, his fourth model, the Satanic Verses, actually became at the very heart of this deep-rooted controversy?
Yeah, so Salman Rushdie was a well-established novelist before the Satanic Verses was published in 1988. He was particularly well known for Midnight's Children, which is a classic novel of the 20th century. But with the Satanic Verses, because it called into questions some claims about Islam, and it questioned whether the Quran was really the book of God and all those kinds of things, as part of its narrative, as part of its story, it caused huge controversy amongst radical Islamists, and then eventually Iran, the Ayatollah of Iran, issued a fatwa against Rushdie and said it was the duty of every Muslim to kill him without delay. That is what the fatwa says. A grotesque death warrant issued against a man whose only crime was to write a novel. So it's been a flashpoint issue for a long time. And I think one of the problems is that too many intellectuals and thinkers and activists in the West have failed to take Rushdie's side over the past 30 years. They've been very cagey about siding with him because they see him as punching down on Muslims, which of course is not true. And therefore they haven't defended him in the way that they should against this regressive 7th century death threat that's been made against him. And I think that has really helped to expose him to the kind of threat that we now know he's still faced from radical Islamists.
So, Brendan, what would you say to those, though, that will say, well, hang on a minute, you know, if you actually come for the portrayal of the Prophet Muhammad, you know that this is a great insult to Muslim peoples, and actually they would argue if you play with fire, you're going to get burned.
Yeah, that is what they say. I think it's disgusting, to be frank, and it's incredibly cowardly. People said the same thing after the Charlie Hebdo massacre in 2015. Some people were saying, look, if you insult Islam, you know that there will be radical Islamists who might attack you. That is victim blaming, to borrow a politically correct term. It's basically saying it's your fault for raising your voice. It's your fault for speaking out. The way I see it is very simple. We now have to take sides. And this grotesque attack on Salman Rushdie in New York, we now know that he's in a very poorly condition. This really demands that we take sides. Are we on the side of freedom of thought and freedom of speech and the right of creative people like Salman Rushdie and everyone else to say whatever they want? Or are we on the side of this regressive, intolerant Islamist movement, which is so pathetic that it wants to murder someone simply for writing a novel? It wants to attack people who dare to insult its religious belief system, and it wants to destroy anyone who offends Muhammad or offends Allah. And I know what side I'm on. I'm on the side of freedom of speech. I'm on the side of Salman Rushdie. But I'm not convinced that there are sufficient numbers in Western society who would take that side. And I think lots of them would see Salman Rushdie as Islamophobic and problematic, and they would be much more cagey in how they approach an issue like this.
Brendan, just briefly, do you think this will have a chilling effect on freedom of expression? Because we've seen in this school, of course, there were a lot of politicians that were awfully silent about Batley Grammar School.
Exactly. And this is the great irony, the dark irony of the Ayatollah's fatwa. It actually sits well with developments in the West itself. Of course, we don't issue death warrants against people who criticize Islam, but we have seen the growth of the Islamophobia industry, which treats it as phobic and wrong to criticize Islam. So you have extremists in the East saying you must never insult Islam, and you have so-called liberals in the West also saying you must never insult Islam. So in different ways, there's a pincher movement against freedom of speech. And we saw that with the Batley Grammar School incident and the protests outside cinemas recently, where you have both extremists and the politically correct saying, don't insult Islam. Freedom of speech includes the freedom to insult any religion we want. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the man himself said the moment you declare a set of ideas to be immune from criticism, satire, derision or contempt, freedom of thought becomes impossible. And Brendan, I think we both agree very strongly on that point. Brendan O'Neill, Spike's chief political writer, I thank you very much for your time. Have a good holiday. Now, folks, moving on, there's been an increase in parents turning to private healthcare providers for support with their children's mental health struggles. It's mainly due to the fact that there's long NHS waiting lists caused by the lockdown strategy. New data shows that mental health is now the most common reason for kids to be referred for support. 6.6 million people are currently waiting for treatment. But what happens to those who cannot afford private healthcare? Well, a man who knows is GP Dr. Lawrence Gurlis, and I'm delighted to say he joins me now. Dr. Gurlis, thank you for your time. Could you just tell us about how big a toll lockdown has actually taken? Have you, in your surgery, seen a hell of a lot more people coming to you and asking for prescriptions and all the rest of it?
Everything, Darren. I mean, it's been a disaster, lockdowns. We should never have a lockdown again. No one ever stopped to think about the effects, not just on mental health, which you've mentioned, but on delayed diagnosis for cancer, heart disease. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen people who couldn't get a face-to-face appointment with their GP, who were fobbed off with prescriptions and later diagnosed with serious illnesses. And you say mental health, children not being allowed to go to school, not getting support at home, not getting proper online teaching. There's been an exponential increase in mental health problems in children, and that's an issue. From the adults' point of view, we've seen an increased death rate in young men, largely related to alcohol, suicide, heart disease. No one's talking about that. No one's publishing those death rates every day the way we saw it for COVID. It's been a disaster, the lockdown. And the other thing, Darren, it probably made no difference to the pandemic, except in the very early stages.
Yeah, and have you personally noticed an increase in the number of kids actually saying, look, they might have got through the lockdowns, 3 of them that there were, Dr. Gurlis, but actually now they're saying it has totally messed with their lives.
Yeah, all different ages of children having different problems. Very young children who didn't see a human face other than their parent, who are now frightened of going out. You have older children with an increased rate of ADHD. We're seeing a lot of referrals for ADHD and eating disorders. And in between, all sorts of mental health issues, including school phobia. What's happened to all those children that have disappeared from the school rolls? Are they all getting home teaching, or we don't know?
No.
But no one's actually asking those questions, Darren. And it's terribly tragic. And as I said, I don't ever want to see another lockdown.
No, because to question these stats, Dr. Gurlis, would actually be to question the orthodoxy around lockdown, wouldn't it? And to question the efficacy of that lockdown, because, it might have saved 1 or 2 lives of the vulnerable groups and categories, but actually now we've seen a real explosion of other side effects that, Dr. Gurlis, I dare say people like you were warning about during those times.
Absolutely. I signed the Great Barrington Declaration. I signed a letter to the then Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, saying, please don't ignore these other conditions. I did that 18 months ago. No one took a blind bit of notice. Look, in defence of the people who brought lockdown in, other countries did the same and worse. Many did worse. If you look at Australia and New Zealand, look at China now, look at Spain and Italy. The only people that got it right was Sweden, who had a lower death rate through not having any lockdown, not closing shops and not closing schools. And I wish we could learn from that. Add to that masks, which probably made very little difference as well. So many things were got wrong. And I don't think this is going to be looked at in the public inquiry, by the way. It's not even a terms of reference to look at the effects, the negative effects of lockdown. It's not even going to be considered.
Yeah, Dr. Gurlis, just briefly, if you would, what do you say to those that can't afford private healthcare? Do you think there is becoming a wider inequality between those who can actually access healthcare?
Yeah, I'm very sympathetic. Private healthcare is not for everyone. It's for the middle and upper classes, particularly mental health. It's a very expensive process. We've just got to improve the health service and improve access for them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Dr. Lawrence Gurlis, I thank you very much for your time. Now, folks, you're watching Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. I thank you very much for your company. I'm going to be back shortly after this break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome. This is Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes, on telly, radio and online. In this next hour, we're going to be discussing the Olympic diver Tom Daley, who said that the British Empire may well be to blame for the homophobia that exists in some Commonwealth countries. Also, it's absolutely glorious sunshine out there today. We're going to see what impact this heatwave is having on our farmers and their crops. And Conservative commentator Father Calvin Robinson joins me throughout to give his thoughts on today's talking points. But first, folks, here's the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Thanks very much, Darren. Good afternoon. It is 3 o'clock. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The author Sir Salman Rushdie is on a ventilator and may lose an eye after he was attacked on a stage at an event in New York yesterday. The 75-year-old was appearing at a literary festival when he was repeatedly stabbed in the neck and abdomen. He's faced several death threats since the 1989 publication of his book, The Satanic Verses. New York State Police have named the suspect as 24-year-old Hadi Matter. He remains in custody. Chief Executive of Humanists UK, Andrew Copson, said that Rushdie was a champion for freedom of expression.
He and his books have become iconic in that cause. And so to see him struck down by violence, not by someone who had an answer to his points, but by someone who senselessly, violently wanted to silence his voice, really just illustrates one of the great dividing lines in our world today.
Rail passengers face further disruption as drivers at 9 train companies walk out over pay and conditions. Train drivers have gathered in northwest London this morning as members of ASLEF walk out. West Coast Services, LNER, London Overground and South Eastern are all affected. Some parts of the country will have no services at all. The Independent's travel editor Simon Calder argues that unions are striking now to cause maximum disruption.
Of course, what ASLEF, the train drivers union, wants to do is cause absolute peak damage to travel plans. And that's why they've chosen a Saturday in the middle of August, because they know it's really going to hit families hard. It's going to hit those travellers who absolutely depend on rail to get to and from their holidays, to go on day trips. They're just doing all they can to cause as much harm as they can.
One person has died and dozens have been injured after a stage collapsed at a music festival near the Spanish city of Valencia. Strong winds caused a section of the main stage at the dance festival to collapse. 3 people were seriously injured, with 14 suffering minor wounds and 40 being treated in total. New court documents show the FBI has seized several top-secret files during a search at Donald Trump's estate in Florida. A federal judge approved a warrant to carry out a search at the former president's Mar-a-Lago property. It's after the US government said it's possible he'd violated the Espionage Act, a law that prohibits passing on or keeping national defence information. Mr. Trump has denied any wrongdoing and said the items were declassified. The Welsh Secretary has become the first cabinet minister to publicly switch sides in the Tory leadership race, putting his support behind Liz Truss. Writing in the Daily Telegraph, Sir Robert Buckland says he believed the Foreign Secretary's economic policy would help the country through the current cost of living crisis. Speaking to Esther and Philip, Brexit Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg also said he's supporting Truss.
I think having somebody who understands that what they thought earlier in life isn't right, and particularly with the referendum, accepts enthusiastically what the British people gave her to deal with. And she's not alone in that. I've always thought the most impressive Remainers are the ones who, once the result came in, said, OK, that's it, I'm accepting it, and I want now to do it properly. And there are a number of those. There are quite a lot who say that and don't really mean it. But I found in government that Liz, other than the Prime Minister himself, was my greatest supporter for getting Brexit opportunities.
The Environment Agency says drought conditions could last until next year. It's after more extreme heat is expected in the south of England this weekend, while the north is set to be struck by thunderstorms and floods. Amber weather warnings have been issued. Further water companies could also enforce stricter measures to conserve supplies, with Yorkshire Water being the latest to introduce a hosepipe ban. Dr. Simon Boxall is a senior lecturer of oceanography, and he told GB News there could be more droughts in the future.
Compare us now to 1976, when we had the last big drought. We're much better prepared than we used to be. But you have got what is tragically a sort of a series of events which has brought this very, very dry weather. And I think we do need to think about this in the future, because we are going to see more of these droughts.
Over 11 tonnes of dead fish have been pulled from a river on the Polish-German border as officials warn of possible contamination. The reason for the mass of dying fish in the River Oder is still unknown. The Polish Prime Minister says it's likely that chemical waste may have been dumped into it. He added the river may take years to return to its normal state. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to the real Britain with Darren Grimes.
Welcome back to the show. Thank you very much for your company. Here's what's coming up over this next hour. It's a scorcher of a day out there, and a drought has been declared across 8 areas in England. We'll be taking a look at what the impact is having on farmers and our crops. A new theatre production will see legendary French heroine Joan of Arc made into a non-binary character. The London Globe Theatre say it's offering a different point of view. More babies born out of wedlock than intermarried families have been recorded for the first time ever. We'll look into the reasons why and champion those single parents who are raising their own kids on their own, of course, too. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. As ever, I'd love to know your thoughts. What do you reckon of Joan of Arc being portrayed as non-binary? Also, Queen Elizabeth I, folks, she wasn't safe either. Tweet me at GB News or email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can watch us on YouTube, and don't forget Facebook. Loads of cracking content on our page. Thanks very much. But before we get on to all of that, more than half of the 54 countries that took part in the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham this month have laws against same-sex relationships. The Olympic diver Tom Daley, who carried a pride flag, or the new iteration of it, it's got more colours on than Coco the Clown, at the opening ceremony, he actually blamed a legacy of colonialism in a BBC documentary. He blamed that for ongoing homophobia across many Commonwealth nations. Now, the Commonwealth Games Federation say that they embrace inclusiveness in everything they do, and that countries where it's illegal to be gay are less likely to host the Commonwealth Games in the future. Well, joining me to discuss this topic is the LGBTQ+ activist Peter Tatchell and the author and historian Zaria Masani. Zaria, can I come to you first of all, please? You fled India in the 1970s due to persecution that you received as a gay man, yet you've actually criticised Tom Daley and the BBC's documentary. Why do you think he's wrong on this issue?
Well, I didn't flee India. I migrated as what one might call a sexual migrant in the 70s. I much admired people like Peter Tatchell at the time, who were campaigning for gay liberation in Britain, and Britain was obviously a much more welcoming place to be. And India, not in my family, who were very westernized and liberal, as a lot of westernized liberal people are. But there was deeply entrenched homophobia, especially in more traditional conservative families. And it's been there, much before Macaulay introduced Section 377 in the Penal Code. He was reflecting local custom. Under Hindu and Muslim traditional law, it was punishable by death.
Yeah, so Zaria,
Macaulay wasn't in...
Yeah, you're saying it was there before, and actually I'm wondering, as a former BBC man, you were at the BBC for many years, Zaria, what do you make of this? Would you say actually it's historically illiterate?
I don't think Tom Daley is a historian. I think he probably meant well. I think he's sort of misguided and he doesn't understand. I grew up in India. I'm very much part of that culture as well. So I understand how deep the roots are. And let's not forget, it was a British colonial introduced court, the Delhi High Court, which repealed Section 377 a few years ago. And it was the Supreme Court, which again derived from colonial times, which upheld that. So, I don't think it's the colonial legacy. I think it's deeply entrenched culture. Homophobia goes back millennia.
So, Zaria Masani, before I bring in Peter Tatchell there, I just want to ask, do you think that people are perhaps too fast to constantly point the blame at the British Empire for some of the evils that still exist in the world?
Well, I think it's very easy to pin the blame on something that is 75 years gone, instead of looking at your own society as it is today. I think that's true of many African countries. I think, you only have to go to most traditional Black or Asian households in Britain to ask them what their views on homophobia are, and to ask young gay Black and Asian people what it's like to grow up in those communities. And I don't think they got it from British colonialism.
So, Peter Tatchell, then, you've been, as Zaria said in his opening remarks there, you've been a campaigner and activist in LGBT equality for many years now. What did you actually make of this documentary and what it said about the British Empire and colonialism's after effect, I guess?
Well, the first thing to be said is that in the vast majority of the 35 Commonwealth countries that still criminalise same-sex relations, those are laws that were originally imposed by Britain when it was the colonial power in the 19th century. The vast majority of those countries had no laws against homosexuality. Indeed, in many traditional tribal cultures, same-sex relations were either accepted or tolerated. So, for example, I have a friend from Nigeria. His great-grandmother told him before she died that, yes, they had people like that in the village, and it was a live and let live attitude. It was only when Britain came in that the draconian sentences were imposed. And today there are 7 Commonwealth countries that have life imprisonment. And that particular penalty was most definitely imposed by Britain as the colonial power in the 19th century. So those were the facts. But however, of course, those countries are now independent. And they can't keep on blaming Britain because they have the right and authority as independent nations to change those laws, and they haven't. And that's the big issue. We have to acknowledge the colonial past and the legacy, but those countries are independent, and it's now up to them to change the law. And so they should, because they've all signed up to the Commonwealth Charter. And the Commonwealth Charter says very clearly that every Commonwealth citizen in every Commonwealth country has a right to equal treatment and protection against discrimination. That does not square with criminalisation. So those countries are defying the Commonwealth Charter that they themselves have signed and have pledged to uphold.
OK. Peter, would you argue then that watching this documentary, do you feel a deep sense of shame to be British?
No, I don't feel shame because I had nothing to do with it, you know. But of course, I regret that Britain did impose these laws and that, you know, as a consequence, many millions of LGBT plus people in Commonwealth countries have lived under very draconian legislation. Many have been imprisoned and in a few cases suffered much worse. You know, there are Commonwealth countries where there are no laws against homosexuality, but mob violence exists, and often the police and local authorities take no action against the perpetrators. In fact, just recently in Uganda, some LGBT plus people reported violent thefts and assaults. And when they went to the police, they were arrested and faced charges, not their assailants.
So, Dr. Zaria Masani, after hearing all that from Peter Tatchell, surely you'll be tweeting out this documentary now. You'll be saying, well done, Tom Daley, for shining a light on the evils of Britain's past.
No, look, I agree with Peter that the British Empire legislated in ways that pre-colonial regimes didn't, and that didn't apply just to sexuality. It was to a whole raft of things, because legislation in the Western sense came in with the British Empire. However, Peter, I'm sure, will recognize that there's a huge gap between law and practice. And I think, you know, laws may legalize or illegalize homosexuality. The actual attitudes to homosexuals may be very different. So, I mean, now India repealed the Section 377 legislation a few years ago. It hasn't really changed attitudes to homosexuals. Most gay people I know are in the closet. They wouldn't dare to come out because their families wouldn't approve. Nothing to do with the law. It's cultural. It's shame. It's heterosexuality is the public norm, and we have to distinguish between the public and the private. There's a lot of homosexual activity that goes on undercover behind the scenes, especially in rural areas where men sleep in dormitories next to each other, are segregated from women. But that doesn't mean it's publicly accepted. They still marry and have children.
Zaria, as far as the Commonwealth's concerned, and I know you are a proponent of the Commonwealth, you think the Commonwealth's quite a good thing, and actually you have argued that there were some, indeed, benefits of empire, you might say, for the likes of India. I'm wondering, would you go as far to say, though, that we should ban countries from hosting major sporting events that perhaps don't share our values on issues like this one?
I would be all for banning countries that ban or, you know, criminalize homosexuality. I mean, I would like the Church of England to sever its ties with the, you know, Anglican churches in Africa that won't go along with legalizing and same-sex partnerships, etc. But unfortunately, I don't decide these things, and I don't think the Commonwealth will do that, and I don't think the Church of England will do that.
Yeah, Peter Tatchell, just very briefly, this year's Football World Cup, of course, is in Qatar, a country with pretty strong anti-gay laws. Are you going to be boycotting the event?
Well, of course, Qatar not only has draconian laws against same-sex relations, it also is very abusive towards women. Women have to get permission from a male guardian to marry, to travel, and to study. Also, we know that at least 6,500 migrant workers have died building the stadiums since Qatar got the World Cup hosting rights in 2010. That is a shocking indictment of its failures, not just on LGBT plus rights, but on all human rights. So I think, you know, Qatar needs to be put under the spotlight. We need to say loud and clear that it has to clean up its act. And in fact, really, given its human rights abuses, it should never have been given the right to host the World Cup.
Well, indeed. LGBTQ plus activist Peter Tatchell, that just gets longer and longer. And the historian Zaria Masani, I thank you for your time. Now, folks, before I get to Calvin Robinson, Caitley Sadlier from the Commonwealth Games Federation had this to say. We embrace inclusiveness in everything we do. We have a lot of exceptional athletes from the LGBT community, and it works closely with them to raise their visibility. Having a really strong Commonwealth Pride network is really important for us. Human rights and inclusiveness is ingrained in our constitution. Our membership absolutely values the values that we have, and they were central to our bidding process, so that would definitely be taken into consideration. Also, of course, the Games this year had a venue called Brighton House, Birmingham, a place that celebrated diversity across the Commonwealth and promoted freedom of expression and intends to deliver a regional legacy that supports LGBTQ plus, I cannot say that, as I say, it gets longer and longer, inclusive sports projects. But anyway, joining me now live in the studio is the Conservative commentator, Reverend Calvin Robinson. Calvin, what do you make of that? Because it does strike me, and you've heard this time and again, you've been arguing for years now about people pointing to, as Zaria Masani said, events that took place well over 70-odd years ago, right, being blamed for the problems of today. Can you blame everything on Britain?
It's rubbish, isn't it? These countries are independent nations with independent parliaments. They make their own laws. They've made many laws since they were former colonies back in the day, and they've repealed many laws. So if they wanted to change the law, they would have done. What this is woke virtue signalers blaming the white man, blaming the British for everything because it's easier than calling people out. If Tom Daley thinks that some countries are homophobic, then call them out as homophobic. Don't blame us. It's not our problem. It's not our fault.
And what did you make of the BBC actually running with this documentary? Are you at all surprised?
Not at all surprised. The biased BBC at it yet again. We held an amazing debate here at GBNews with Liz Truss recently. Did we see any of that covered on the BBC? No, not at all.
And so do you think then there is this attempt, I mean, we mentioned it in that conversation with Niall Gardner earlier, about the attempt by, and you mentioned the liberal media, just seeking a stick with which they can beat the West, not just Britain, but the West in general. Is that what's going on here?
It's the common problem, isn't it? That the metropolitan liberal elite, they're self-flagellating. They think that all of our history is bad and we all need to repent constantly for the rest of our lives, especially if we're white in this country. You're just inherently bad. And there's no getting over that fact with them. And I don't know what their problem is, but they need to keep it to themselves. The rest of us are fine. In fact, we're celebrating being British because it's one of the best places in the world to live.
And, you know, the fact of the matter is that there are so many countries that Britain had absolutely naff all to do with.
I know.
And they could be vehemently homophobic in their laws and culture. And yet, we are uniquely evil in the world.
It's an easy target, isn't it? And the problem with the mainstream media is that it's not necessarily left-wing, it's not necessarily right-wing. They have this metropolitan liberal elite stance. They're so disconnected from the rest of the real world. It is that Westminster bubble. They need to get out there in the rest of the country and talk to some normal people.
Absolutely, because there are real issues out there. But Calvin Robinson will be coming back to you shortly. There is plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain. Now, it's a scorcher of a day out there today. Next, we're going to spare a thought for our farmers and how they're managing their crops after we've looked at that scorching weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking warm for many as temperatures only slowly fall away across the country. Let's take a look at the details. There will be plenty of late evening sunshine across the southwest of England with only light breezes. It will be feeling warm with temperatures still in the mid to high 20s. The temperatures across the southeast of England may be even warmer and still be in the low 30s this evening. Some high cloud may make the sunshine a little hazy though before sunset. High cloud may also be across the skies in Wales, possibly giving a vivid sunset this evening. It will be feeling warm with temperatures still in the mid to high 20s. Cloud could also be bubbling up this evening across the Midlands, but it will remain dry, though with light and variable winds as well. Temperatures this evening likely to remain in the low 30s. Northeast coast of England may have a rather gloomy evening as some sea fog moves in, but for many the day will end on a very warm and sunny note. The low cloud and fog will also affect the north and east coast of Scotland. The high ground may also see a shower develop, but for most it will be dry and warm. It's a similar story in Northern Ireland as we end the day with perhaps some cloud near the coast, but for most it will be sunny and feeling warm. Overnight, we may see some showers develop in the northwest, but for most it will be dry and remaining warm. And that is how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable, and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Welcome back to the show. Now, folks, the combination of environmental laws, inflation and the current dry conditions are causing a great many problems for farmers. There's been reduced yields, lower quality produce and less profits, just to name a few. But here's GB News' Northern Ireland reporter, Dougie Beattie, to tell us more.
I think there needs to be support for agriculture. It just needs to be more targeted.
And we don't want to get a situation where, as a nation, we are become totally dependent on imported food products and we end up with empty shelves.
We're unable to send anything to Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland and the south of Ireland would be Scotland's basically #1 customer.
Headline price, we will say, for the sake of example, is 45 pence a litre. Cost of production is somewhere around about 60 pence a litre at the moment.
Real voices from days of travelling around the UK to find out just where food production stands. Rising costs, a lack of joined-up thinking is driving up prices at the checkout. Giles Cannon is a fruit producer from Kent who appreciates global pressures but sees the need for better commercial thinking and less legislation on green issues.
There's definitely a lot of global factors at play, but there also are some that could have been influenced better by domestic policies, for sure. We can farm in an efficient and sensible way, producing enough products for people to eat without destroying the environment. It's not an either-or situation, but if you do focus too much on the environment at the expense of production, you will export your production overseas, and is that a good thing environmentally?
The lack of rain is helping some crops, but causing problems for others.
I think apples, pears, that type of commodity, they are struggling, and we don't have sufficient water from our own reservoir to water all the crops all the time, and so we have some orchards where we're going to see diminished yields and smaller size profile in the fruit.
The agri-industry is frustrated at the amount of legislation going forward on environmental issues, and Stephen Crabb MP explains the costly decision on the red diesel restrictions.
The Treasury, they said they listened, but the decision and the conclusion that they came to was that because of their environmental objectives of trying to reduce diesel use and move away from, as they say it, polluting fossil fuels, they wanted to press ahead with the change. But that has had an impact, a significant impact on many parts of industry here in West Wales.
My journey has only scratched the surface of the problems that those in the agricultural sector face. If the government are to get inflationary pressures on food under control, they must decide whether it is open or closed markets and a policy for the UK. Or they may decide to just go for low-hanging fruit. Dougie Beattie, GB News, Kent.
Dougie Beattie in Kent there. Now, listening to that, folks, was Martin Lyons, the UK chair of the Nature Friendly Farming Network. Martin, thank you very much for your company. Can you tell us what impact the dry conditions are actually having on your industry?
Well, we're already seeing farmers reporting reduced yield, reducing quality. Many of the food products won't be available later in the year. Many of the livestock farmers have run out of grass and are using their winter food provision now, and that means knock-on effects. We're already hearing from supply chains that are grumbling about the size of vegetables and fruits and produce that isn't meeting specification and rejecting it. So then farmers are getting left with more food waste. It's going to have a real long knock-on effect, not just for now, but into next year as well.
And Martin, I've been hearing whispers that you've been seeing wonky vegetables and things like that have been a phenomenon of the weather. Why is that going on?
Well, many of the crops just haven't got enough moisture to make their potential, grow to their potential, to the right size and shape to supermarkets and supply chains specifications. So what we actually need to do is make sure as much of the food farmers produce reaches the consumer's plate. Some produce may be a little bit out of shape, may not look quite as normal as. Make sure that food reaches people's plates.
Yeah, I mean, Martin, I must say, it wouldn't bother me in the slightest having a wonky veg. I mean, are we really that hung up on having a perfectly looking vegetable that you're just going to chop up and, shove down your gullet anyway?
Yeah, I mean, food waste is at 40%. Money when they're processing the produce, when it comes off fields, huge amounts of waste because it doesn't quite meet the specification. That needs to stop. We can actually reduce the food costs because if we get more of the food that farmers produce and put it on people's plates, that'll make things a lot better. And we can do a fairer balance then of how we produce food, how we manage our landscape and the biodiversity. And farmers can do both. It's not about one or the other.
I know you focus a lot on the environmental impact and those discussions around that. What would you say to groups? We've just had a representative on earlier in the show from Animal Rebellion, which was throwing milk all over Harrods, the very luxury supermarket. I wonder, what do you make of moves like that to actually say that your industry, the farming industry, is the problem as far as global climate change is concerned?
I think for global climate change, it's our consumerism across the board. Yes, some farming practices does have impact, the same as any other industry, and we can improve, and many are already trying to do that. But livestock need to be a key part of me managing my landscape. I've managed to remove and reduce a lot of my artificial fertilisers, which were used out of fossil fuel, because I have livestock on the farm fertilising my crops. So we need to find this fair balance where we have a farming system that actually repairs some of the damage from the past, delivers climate and biodiversity solutions, and delivers healthy food for consumers. And we need consumers not just to support the food we produce, but also help reward the biodiversity we can deliver. I can't do it on my own. We need some financial support. We need to cover some of the costs of our natural habitats and landscapes. And currently, some of our food prices don't manage to do that. So farmers are in a tight space at the moment. Which do we deliver? And hopefully, through government support and through supply chain support, farmers can really step up to the plate and deliver solutions to society for our climate crisis, our biodiversity crisis, and actually our food crisis. As much of the food we eat are not doing us any favours.
Right, well, Martin Lyons from a very beautiful looking Cambridgeshire there. Thank you very much for your contribution to that discussion. Folks, these are with GB News on telly and radio. Next, we'll be discussing Joan of Arc. A new theatre production in London will see legendary French heroine Joan of Arc made into a non-binary character. What does that even mean? But now it's time for a check on the news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
It's 3:34. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The author Sir Salman Rushdie is on a ventilator and may lose an eye after he was attacked on stage during an event in New York yesterday. The 75-year-old was appearing at a literary festival when he was repeatedly stabbed in the neck and abdomen. He's faced several death threats from Islamists since the 1989 publication of his book, The Satanic Verses. New York State Police have named the suspect as 24-year-old Hadi Matar. He remains in custody. The Environment Agency says drought conditions could last until next year. It's after more extreme heat is expected in the south of England this weekend, while the north is set to be struck by thunderstorms and floods. Amber weather warnings have been issued. Further water companies could also enforce stricter measures to conserve supplies, with Yorkshire Water being the latest to introduce a hosepipe ban. Train drivers have gathered in London as members of ASLEF walk out over jobs, pay and conditions. West Coast Services, LNER, London Overground and South Eastern are all affected. Some parts of the country will have no services running at all. Over 11 tonnes of dead fish have been pulled from a river on a Polish-German border as officials warn of possible contamination. The reason for the mass of dying fish in the River Oder is still unknown. The Polish Prime Minister says it's likely that chemical waste may have been dumped into it. He added the river may take years to return to its normal state. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere, Darren's back in a moment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the show. Now, as you might have heard in my earlier discussion with Brendan O'Neill of Spiked Online, Sir Salman Rushdie's agent has said that the author is on a ventilator and may lose an eye after he was attacked on stage during an event in New York yesterday. The 75-year-old was appearing at a literary festival when he was repeatedly stabbed in the neck and the abdomen. He's faced several death threats from Islamists since 1989, when the publication of his book, The Satanic Verses, was made. New York State Police have named the suspect as 24-year-old Hadi Matar. He remains in custody. Some media in Iran has hailed the stabbing of what they call an apostate, Salman Rushdie. Now, Mark Summer is a reporter at Buffalo News, and he joins me now from New York. Mark, thank you for your company. How have people in New York reacted to this absolutely appalling scenes?
I think they've reacted the way people are reacting all over the world. Sense of shock, they're stunned, horrified. It's a unbelievably awful situation that's occurred.
What actually happened at the event, for my viewers that might not be aware? Have you heard from people who witnessed this firsthand?
Yes, it was almost 24 hours to the minute that Salman Rushdie and another person he was going to be in conversation with were at the Chautauqua Institution in Western New York. For your audience who doesn't know about Western New York State is actually larger than England. So people tend to think of New York State as being just New York City, but it's a much bigger state than that. And the Chautauqua Institution is in the western part of the state. It's a place where people go for literary and cultural programming, speakers, and that sort of thing in the summertime. So Rushdie was there, and the introductory remarks had just been made, or just started really, when, according to the witnesses I spoke with, when a man leaped onto the stage and immediately attacked Salman Rushdie. We now know that he had a knife, and he plunged that knife into Salman Rushdie multiple times. What we've only learned from the literary agent Andrew Wiley of Salman Rushdie is that Rushdie suffered a severed nerves in an arm. He apparently will lose an eye. He had severe damage to his liver, and he is on a ventilator. The medical staff at the hospital where Mr. Rushdie was airlifted to have yet to make a statement. So we don't know any more than what we really know from the literary agent at this point.
And Mark, is there any motive suggested at this point?
All we know is the name and the age and the residence of the suspect, nothing more. Obviously, speculation is rampant for good reason. That it could be tied to the fatwa that was issued, but we don't know that yet.
No. And what was security like at the event? Because I wonder, do you have members of the audience actually rushing up to the defense of Mr. Rushdie?
Yes, indeed. Witnesses I talked to said from 10 to 15 people very quickly jumped onto the stage themselves, subdued the assailant, also tried to help Mr. Rushdie. There were doctors in the audience, it turns out, and doctors and emergency medical technicians on hand helped him on the spot. And there was a state police officer and a deputy sheriff for the county where the institution's located that were actually there by the stage, and that helped subdue the assailant.
Mark,
but you asked about security. So we know there were 2 members of law enforcement there, but there's no indication there were more than that.
Well, exactly.
And
that's what I was going to ask.
Surprising.
It is very surprising because you've just set out that there was this fatwa against Mr. Rushdie that actually, threats to his life have been made throughout the last few decades. Why wasn't there more of a security presence here?
We don't have an answer to that yet. I've tried this morning to speak with the institution, the Chautauqua Institution, and they're just referring me to a statement that the state police issued that doesn't really answer many questions.
So
you'd also think by now that Mr. Rushdie would travel with maybe private security, given the many threats on his life. But there's no indication that that happened.
He hasn't reduced his own security then?
The problem is it's all speculation. We don't know because no one is speaking about security beyond the fairly minimal amount that we're aware of that was there at the time. And that's shocking, I would say.
Absolutely, Mark. I couldn't agree more. But thank you for bringing us that report there from New York. Mark Summer, of course, being a reporter from Buffalo News. I thank you for your time. Absolutely horrible, horrible thing to have happened. Now, I, Joan, a new play about Joan of Arc to be performed at the Globe, famous as it is, very, very enjoyable. Perhaps it used to be. Now it strikes me as it's becoming quite the bore. But the Globe will portray the French heroine as a gender-neutral character who uses they, them pronouns. You would think, and I'm sure Calvin Robinson next to me agrees, that Joan of Arc would have had other priorities, but there we are. The theatre describes the play as alive, queer and full of hope, but it's been criticised for degendering, whatever that means, a heroic female historical figure who achieved great success in a male-dominated medieval world. So is this a progressive step back, or an attack, a step forward even, or an attack on the feminine? Well, joining me to discuss this is Dr. Sarah Rutherford, the author of The Women's Work, Men's Culture, and Calvin Robinson, who is with me in the studio. Now, Dr. Rutherford, what was your reaction when you heard this story? Because I've been reading through my Twitter account, which I spend far too much time on, by the way, that actually Queen Elizabeth I isn't even safe. She has lost her sex as well.
I saw that too. Pretty horrified, to be honest. I mean, I didn't feel, huge disappointment that often. But when I saw that Joan of Arc was going to be they, them, I just thought, what is happening? I mean, we don't have many female icons in history, and she is one absolutely amazing one. She, as you said, she was born in the 15th century where women were, little more than chattels, and she, having received these visions from God, went on and fought and led an army and eventually was canonized. So, I mean, I just don't see what's adding to it by taking away the fact that she was an exceptional woman.
Yes, and Dr. Rutherford, I wonder then, some would argue, as I said at the start there, that this is a progressive step forward, that actually this is an advancement of society. But I say, hang on a minute. Surely it's an ultimately really regressive move to eradicate sex and gender from historic women with importance and prominence in our history across the West, like Joan of Arc and Queen Elizabeth I.
It's definitely a regressive step. If you think about it, we're only just uncovering some of the historical female figures. For instance, the ones that have been discovered to be code breakers, to be the computer scientists at NASA and all this. And actually, the whole thing about actually moving out of a gender stereotype, which is obviously what Joan of Arc did massively, is what feminism has been all about. We don't want to be restricted into feminine roles. It doesn't mean you're not women. In the same way as for men to embrace other roles, it doesn't mean they're not men. We're still men and women, but we don't have to be confined. And this is confining and essentializing traits that we might think belong to men and women, but not all of them do. It's society and culture.
Yeah. Calvin Robinson, I wonder then, some might say that theatres are there to create, right? They're there to produce these plays and actually have a bit of artistic license. Do you actually agree with those sentiments, or do you think there's something else at play here?
Yeah, no, that's fair. They do, and I have this debate with the chairman of the Shakespeare Globe quite often. But because her perspective is that they need to have different perspectives, so they need to put forward different artistic flares on these plays. But my argument is always, well, why is it always from the same perspective every single time? Why is it always increasingly woke? And why is it always increasingly well, sexist, to be frank with you. It's always the women, the female lead characters that get their gender erased into they or them, or their lines that get altered into male lines or masculine lines. This idea that Joan, because she wasn't the most feminine of characters, was somehow less of a woman, that is a sexist argument. And you know, the feminist debate has gone on for a long time to get equality for women. And I would argue that we actually have equality at this point. And the whole woke movement is moving beyond equality, and it's going in reverse. And it's actually undermining women's rights and women's equality.
Absolutely. Dr. Rutherford, I wonder then, some might argue that a justification for portraying Joan of Arc as non-binary is that these theatres they're not there to deal with historical reality. What do you say to that argument?
Well, I'm not necessarily saying that they can't take artistic license in lots of situations, but I do think that when there are so few historical female icons, and the whole story of Joan of Arc is extraordinary because she was a woman and a young girl, really, even when she, fought the wars and everything. So it doesn't have to be exactly to the thing, but it is what it's saying to young girls is that a girl that steps out of a prescribed role isn't really a girl, and that's really important.
Isn't that what we're saying in society at the moment, though? If a girl is not subscribing to gender stereotypes, she's not a girl and she needs to transition into a boy. You are actually erasing women. It's so terrible to see it happening in front of our eyes.
It's really upsetting for women of my age, that when we were growing up, there weren't so many opportunities, and we've seen huge progress. And to see it sort of, as you say, Calvin, being erased like this is really upsetting. It's why, so many of us are actually now starting to stand up and fight for it.
And I tell you, one question I've got where I'm really confused is why, when it comes to these ideas of non-binary characters, why does it exclusively seem to be, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but why does it seem to be that it's always females that are targeted?
Oh, what, in terms of being abused?
In terms of being told that they're actually non-binary?
Degendered.
Oh, yes, well, it is, isn't it? Because we know from the whole awful situation with the Tavistock that 70% of the youngsters that are going forward for referrals, 70% are girls. That's a complete reversal to what it used to be 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. So there's something about avoiding or escaping. I think it's probably more acceptable to be trans now than to be gay. I don't know whether that's it or not. There's something going on that really, I think it's obviously being explored by the Cass report, but it's not good news for girls. They should be able to be who they are without being labelled a sort of a non-woman, when actually that's just not true.
And Calvin Robinson, it does strike me that Dr. Rutherford has a point there in that there is a hierarchy of rights with identities, right? You up and down in the pecking order. Women used to be there, they're not anymore. And actually, that's what the Globe are trying to do here, isn't it? To virtue signal on this hierarchy and actually put ID politics front and centre at an institution like that.
They are, and they're getting it all wrong, but I think it's wider than the Globe. It's a societal issue. We've forgotten what it means to be a woman, and I appreciate the irony of me here, a man, talking about what it means to be a woman, but it used to be that men and women were different, but complementary. We had different things to provide. Like, men tend to be stronger, more athletic, and women tend to be more nurturing, and that used to be a good thing, and then it was seen as a bad thing, and to compete in the workplace, etc., women were seen to have to be more like men, until we reached a point where now women have to be men in order to be equal to us, and it shouldn't be that way. That we should accept women. We should say, actually, it's a good thing to be a mother. You don't have to go to work. You can have the option, and it's no longer the case. It's now you must be a man in a man's world, otherwise you're less than.
Yeah, and I tell you what, Queen Elizabeth I, I mean, it's just terrible, I think, what they're doing to history and to truth and fact. But anyway, folks, we will leave it there. Dr. Sarah Rutherford, I could go on all day with you. That was the author of The Women's Work, Men's Cultures, and Conservative commentator Reverend Calvin Robinson in the studio. Now, I do want to read out this right of reply from the Globe's website. They actually said, "We are committed to becoming an inclusive and diverse organisation willing to make necessary change. We aim to create a culture and environment in which everyone's experience at Shakespeare's Globe is equal, inclusive and equitable." Yeah, anyway, moving on. The number of babies born to unmarried mothers has overtaken the number born to married mums for the first time since records began in 1845. There were 320,000 births to women who were not married or in a civil partnership, when they give birth. That's compared to 304,000 live births to mothers who were. Now, this follows the long-term trend of declining marriage rates and increasing numbers of cohabiting couples even, seen in recent decades. I'm joined by Sarah Davison, a divorce coach, and the Conservative commentator, Reverend Calvin Robinson, again in the studio. Sarah, what's going on here? What's the significance of these numbers?
Well, I think it's just a sign of our changing times. People are getting married later. They have different life goals. I think a lot of women now are focused on their career and having a successful career and maybe aiming towards financial stability before jumping on to having that family unit. And I do think things have changed. People are having babies later, we're waiting, and we're having fewer children. So I think all that does impact. Plus, of course, you throw in the pandemic where we weren't able to get married. And if you're in a situation where your clock is ticking, you've decided that's the right way forward for you, it is going to be time just to maybe swap those priorities around. And I think that's what we're seeing.
Calvin, did these stats shock you?
Yeah, I find them very sad. I was looking at them compared to other stats recently. We had over 200,000 abortions last year. Compare that to just over 300,000 children being born in a married family. The family is dying out. This is sad. The numbers are catching up with each other. We're ending as many families as we're creating. A family has become less important to us in our Western way of life, and I think our enemies are laughing at us. I think if we look at states that are hostile to the UK, such as Russia and China, they are encouraging wholesomeness and family life and family values more and more so because they understand that is the bedrock of society. And we've kind of flagellated it away and said, live a life of promiscuity and fun and pleasure and forget about consequences, forget about commitment and forget about family. And it's to our own detriment.
Sarah, what would you say then to those that say, well, hang on, there are real problems of children being born out of wedlock if you look at the data as far as a child's life chances are concerned?
Well, I mean, I don't really agree with Calvin, I'm afraid, on that. I think that you can have good family values. You don't need a marriage certificate to have that. I think ultimately you can't guarantee a happy childhood just from a ring and a wedding. I think it takes a lot more than that. And I think the priority is having a happy, healthy relationship and family unit rather than having a married family unit. So I do think things have changed.
If I can, that's a slightly disingenuous argument because of course there are exceptions, of course there always will be in every argument, but you can guarantee a happier home life, you can guarantee better outcomes for children in a married life. That's what all the statistics show us. The latest report from the Centre for Social Justice says, for example, if you have a breakdown in the family and you end up in a single parent family, your children are twice as likely to end up homeless, twice as likely to end up on drugs, twice as likely to end up in crime and homelessness, and more likely to fail in school. So it is better off for children and families to remain as a married family.
Sarah Davison, a very, very quick reply, if you would.
Well, I mean, there are, of course, examples of that, but I strongly believe that you can still, even as a single parent, I'm a single parent myself, and I think there's definitely things you can do. And that's what I spend my life doing, is helping people take back their power and show their kids how to take back control and have a happy, confident future, even without that. Sometimes these situations are out of our control.
OK, we'll leave it there. Sarah Davison, though, the divorce coach, I thank you very much for your time. And, of course, Calvin Robinson, who's been joining me throughout the show. You at home, you're the loves of my life. You've been watching Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. I thank you very much for your company. And tomorrow at 2 o'clock, I'll see you then. But for now, here's the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking warm for many as temperatures only slowly fall away across the country. Let's take a look at the details. There will be plenty of late evening sunshine across the southwest of England with only light breezes. It will be feeling warm with temperatures still in the mid to high 20s. The temperatures across the southeast of England may be even warmer and still be in the low 30s this evening. Some high cloud may make the sunshine a little hazy though before sunset. High cloud may also be across the skies in Wales, possibly giving a vivid sunset this evening. It will be feeling warm with temperatures still in the mid to high 20s. Cloud could also be bubbling up this evening across the Midlands, but it will remain dry, though with light and variable winds as well. Temperatures this evening likely to remain in the low 30s. Northeast coast of England may have a rather gloomy evening as some sea fog moves in, but for many the day will end on a very warm and sunny note. The low cloud and fog will also affect the north and east coast of Scotland. The high ground may also see a shower develop, but for most it will be dry and warm. It's a similar story in Northern Ireland as we end the day, with perhaps some cloud near the coast, but for most it will be sunny and feeling warm. Overnight, we may see some showers develop in the northwest, but for most it will be dry and remaining warm. And that is how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last